We're really pleased to have Kevin Braney here with us today. He is not just a PhD, which congratulations, that's pretty exciting. He is the founder and CEO of the Resiliency Group. He is a victim advocate. He has been doing this for a long time. He supports and offers resources for survivors of institutional sex abuse. And following the Mesa shooting, Kevin served as one of the incident commanders helping our community coordinating mental health response for victims, associates, and the community. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, the community. Also, he is the chair of the U.S. Department of Justice Commission or Committee representing over 400 survivors of clergy abuse in a federal bankruptcy case in northern New York. He has a fascinating and inspiring biography. I would encourage all of you to do a Google search, and I know that you will be inspired. Kevin?
Wow.
Come on up.
Thank you, Cassidy. Is it okay if I'm up here, Fred? Thank you all for having me.
I will be right here, and I'll leave you.
Thank you. Sure. Well, I'm humbled and honored with that introduction, and I'm honored to be here. I think I've been spending a lot of time thinking through kind of how to share what I've learned and what is, I believe, within the confines of this horrible tragedy our community faced with the loss of 10 lives in March of 2021. There's a little glimmer of something that I think I wanted to share with all of you. And I think it is something that I hope, and I've always known as a former educator in Boulder, that there's a profound sense of community here. And I'm going to walk you through some of the milestones, I guess, of the mental health response. But I would ask you, as you're going through or listening to what I'm sharing with you, is to see yourself. And what I mean by that is organizations like Rotary, the faith communities, the volunteers, the high school students that did vigils, processions, and did so many things that couldn't even be named. Those are the things that helped our community heal and continue to heal, because there's a long journey ahead. I saw our district attorney walk in, and I'm really honored to be here with you too, and the role that you've played in all of this. What I'm trying to say in a roundabout way as I'm warming up is there's a foundation in Boulder that's unique. And I think it comes from the work that you all do and the community that we have here, and this idea that familiarity breeds cooperation. And I'm going to tell you a little story of what happened to explain to you how unique this is. And then I'm going to walk you through some of the key milestones of our response, and then give you a chance to ask me some questions. Know that as I'm going through this is a very particular lane. This is just about the trauma response. This isn't about the good work that law enforcement did, or the district attorney's office did, or others. I'm certainly at the Community Foundation, but it's a little sliver of a really important pie. So in my comments, I also want to be exclusive too, because there's so much that's happened here. But the story is this. I was asked to be the incident commander for Mental Health Partners responding to the trauma within the first few days. I can't even remember when, actually. And I came into what became really the second location of the Boulder Strong Resource Center, on top of the bank there in the Mesa parking lot. And I walked up the stairs. It was upstairs. The room was empty, and the tables were all set in a horseshoe. And the people that were around the table were people from King Soopers or Kroger, Colorado Organization for Victim Assistance. I think Katarina Booth was there from the DA's office. And I walked in, and Ted Schaefer, who's the executive vice president with Kroger, started off the meeting with this: I don't know what to do. We sell groceries, and we're really, really good at it, but we don't know what to do. And it still gives me chills to share with you the way he was so vulnerable in that moment. And he said, help help you help the community. And what is so unique about what's happened about this foundation here is, and what Nancy Lewis from COVA, the Colorado Organization for Victim Assistance, said is, she has never seen a community come together the way Boulder had. She had never seen a group of community leaders come together so humbly in service to the community with no egos. There was no egos in the room. And from there, and what I think you're going to see as I go through this PowerPoint is just a list of names and groups and organizations that all came together to provide support. And that is so important because we know the most powerful antidote to trauma is community and connection. When you bring people together, they can start to heal. We know they're going to gather anyways, but when you bring them together with a common purpose and a space to heal, amazing things happen. So as I go through this too, I'm going to share you a few stories and some that are funny, some maybe not, but it was a really humbling journey for me to go through, and it changed my life. And I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. So, I have it. Do I have it? Yeah, sorry. I do. Okay, so just real quick, just to level set the conversation, there's 3 phases to the response for a mass tragedy like the Table Mesa shooting. There's the initial response, first responders, multi-agency, think of lights basically coming on the scene. Then there's a whole nother phase that gets initiated, and I'm glossing over a lot here around stabilization. And I'm really thinking with that mental health trauma lens. The victim advocates arrive on the scene and they help people reunite with each other. They get them to an off-site location that's safe. They get them to a place where we can start to figure out where their family is, or where their belongings are, or just the basic things that they need to understand where they're at. Because they're in that trauma space, and we're going to talk about what that is in a minute, but their frontal lobe really isn't online when you're experiencing that kind of trauma. So what we're going to talk about here in the short time I have is really the pathway to and supports for recovery. This is a slide that we used in one of the meetings at Boulder High School, actually, which was great, where we hosted the King Soopers folks and people from Kroger. And this is just a really simple, yet unbelievably important vision of what healing from trauma can look like. There is an assumption that we'll get through this, we'll do X, Y, and Z, and everything will be fine on the other side of it. Or maybe I might even soldier on, and I'll just be fine. The reality is, it looks more like the reality there to your right, where it's a squiggly line, where everything kind of gets tossed up. We start to ask really essential questions about life, about why. Why did this happen? Or things like a gentleman that I'll just call James, who happened to stop by the store to get a sandwich because he was running late for a meeting, and then found himself in the middle of this terrible event. Why was I there that day? And the reality is, and what we've learned from our partners, or what mental health partners now understands too, is that the words of wisdom that we had from the trauma response team from the Aurora shooting was their busiest year. Their busiest year was 6 years after the tragedy. Sure, it was busy in the beginning, then it went down, and then on that anniversary, all of a sudden they were overwhelmed again, and we'll talk about maybe why that was the case. Just for fun, a little picture of the brain, right? This is a slide I use when I teach psychological first aid. There's 2 really important quotes on either side bookending the picture that I might even take a moment to read, actually. The single most important issue, the one on the left, for people traumatized is to find a sense of safety in their own bodies. And then the far one, trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, natural disaster, man-made disaster. Immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical, and longer-term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, or even physical symptoms like headaches or even nausea. Dr. Vandercook really talks about, it's a wonderful read if you ever has a chance, The Body Keeps the Score, about how trauma really lives in the body. But I just wanted to share this as a level setting picture as well, with the idea that when we teach psychological first aid, we talk about fight, flight, freeze, faint, and friend. was 5 F's. I know I did that fast. And the fact is, despite our best wishes and our hopes for how we think we might respond to a traumatic situation, that reptilian part of our mind, the parts of our mind that are way back here, they have that power to shut off our frontal lobe. So a lot of the healing that we have to do is think about, well, how do we bring that frontal lobe back online? And this idea that as we decrease stress, this is really the whole principle around psychological first aid. As we decrease stress, we can increase someone's ability to adapt and cope with their new situation. So everything you're going to see about the actions that we took, some worked out better than others. There's certainly tons of lessons to learn. But it's all about building community, connection, and providing space for people to heal, to help that frontal lobe come back online. Because we all wish, if any of you have been through severe trauma, I'm sure we all have in some ways, you can't just snap out of it. It doesn't work. So things that we saw, these are very common. Flashbacks, nightmares, intrusive thoughts. Folks finding ways to avoid with use of substances or numbing or disassociation. These are all common things with all kinds of trauma, not just to mass tragedy or mass gun violence. Some of the more special ones, I guess you could call them, on the bottom, is all about that sense of a lost sense of safety that I'm sure many of you felt too, maybe even still feel. Talking with people in the neighborhood about how to go back into a grocery store for the first time. What was that like for them? And how to go back in without a to-do list, just to go in. You know, and the first step is just to walk around without trying to get through your grocery list, because that in of itself can be stressful, right? And trying to find ways to help people feel supported, connected, and help with that sense of overwhelmness that can come upon someone with no prediction almost. The last thing that I wanted to say about the trauma-informed approach is just this idea of these were kind of our guiding principles that we used with the work. There's an amazing group of people at Mental Health Partners who I relied on because I'm not a clinician. I just have a lot of lived experience with trauma and a lot of experience with managing complex situations as a high school principal, as you would imagine. The realization about trauma and how it can affect people in groups, recognizing the signs of trauma. Dr. Janine DeAnnabelle, some of you may know her, did tons of community trainings to help people understand what to look for, because these are all normal reactions to really abnormal circumstances. Having a system which can respond to trauma, that's the Boulder Strong Resource Center, which is so cool that some of you are going to get to go see that. And then the idea of certainly resisting re-traumatization. So the first milestone was set up out on 63rd. It was the Family Reunification Center. So go back to that slide where I showed you the initial lights arrived on the scene, stabilization, and managing the event. After that all settles down, so to speak, this Family Reunification Center was set up at 63rd via transportation. And in there, you're going to start to see some themes. In there, you could walk into a room. It was a little bit smaller than this, but there were folks from the Salvation Army. There were the advocates from the FBI were there. MHP had a clinical team there, and folks trained in psychological first aid. Folks from Boulder County, just volunteers, people who wanted to help, and then members from local law enforcement. Sorry for the typo up there. Some of you probably didn't see it, and I just pointed it out. So it went okay, but what we found was, you know what, it was too far away for the associates. It was too far out, so we needed to move it. So that's when I mentioned earlier with that story, we moved to the King Soopers location there on Table Mesa, right above the bank, the Chase Bank. One of the unique things about Colorado, unfortunately, that comes from our history, is we had regular phone calls with Aurora Mental Health, All Health Network, folks who have been involved in the Aurora Theater shooting, Columbine and STEM, and Jefferson Center for Mental Health. They literally get on the phone with us, and we're standing up the resource center, and they said, how can we help? Here are some things to anticipate. Here are some lessons that we learned. How can we support you? And then every once in a while, Amber from All Health used to reach out and just randomly say, Kevin, how are you? What's going on today? That collegiality that I'm talking about, that is really, really unique. No one was there to finger point. No one was there to second guess. No one was there to kind of provide their own agenda. It was all, how can we help based upon lessons that they had learned? So how do we carry it forward, unfortunately, if there's another event? This is just an example. MHP shifted their entire operations when this first happened, and we would have daily huddles as a senior leadership team. And I don't know where I found this in my notes, but this is just an example of the agenda on April 20th, a month later after everything had happened. And we were going through, well, what happens if there's another crisis? How can we respond? What are the federal and victim grants that are out there? How can we provide temporary recovery for folks, and what do we need to look for the long term? We would always get updates from Katerina at the DA's office. We were worried and thinking through anniversaries, Easter, Father's Day, Mother's Day, the noise that comes with July 4th. Like, how do we start preparing for and helping the folks that were coming into the resource center? The other thing that I just want to highlight on number 8 there is King Soopers was really unbelievable. They understood that helping people through trauma was all about choice. And when they're ready, there are some people that wanted to go back to work the next day, and there are other people that they had a different journey. And King Soopers did everything within their power to support them with that. And kudos to them, Arthur and Ted, and the people there that really designed a really thoughtful, compassionate program to support their associates from the simple premise of, we don't know how to do this, and they really, really listened. It was an amazing experience. Up there on the top left, I know it's not big, I don't know if you all can see it in the back, but that was just a picture of the resource center. I'm going to try and walk over here without falling, just to point out something. These were the services we offered, like acupuncture, payroll was there for HR, comfort dogs, which we'll talk about, obviously counseling, massage therapy, Red Cross. We had a support from the Veterans Association there, and lots of support from victim advocates. But if you look up here, see the couches and everything in the middle? That's where the comfort dogs would stay. And this whole thing, this was an empty space. When I said I first met Ted and he's like, tell us what to do, they went out over the weekend and furnished the whole place. They put in IT, had everything ready for us to open up on like a Monday or Tuesday. It was unbelievable. But more often than not, too, you can also see maybe those little blue signs. Those were all the resources, and they're just around the room on the outside, like this. And what's so important about that picture is lots of times folks would just come in and sit on the couch and not want to talk to anybody. Sometimes folks would come in and just want to pet the dogs. And other times folks would come in and they would connect with somebody that was in the incident that they didn't know was a neighbor, or they made a connection. And I can tell you those are going to be lifelong relationships that they have now, because they've been through this horrible experience together. But that resource center was now it's out on Baseline, is a really, really amazing place of healing. These are the dogs, if you can believe this. This is unbelievable. It started off with the Hope Coalition. The Hope Animal Assistant Crisis Response. Hope Coalition, something different, right? They had teams that would fly in across the country, and this is what they do. And they would have 2 or 3 dogs there and their trainers and everything. And the dogs would sit on the couches and talk to people. And a couple of people, that's all they wanted to do. They didn't want to see me. They didn't want to see a counselor. They just wanted to see the dog. My friend was down here, Talon. He's this big, goofy dog, bigger than a St. Bernard. He's a special type of dog. I don't remember his name. Sorry, Talon. But just they provided this amazing sense of comfort. Thank you. And healing for all of us to be there. I'm going to go through these really quickly. These are really interesting to me as a data person. 545 people came into the resource center from the day it was opened through April 13th. And you can see over here, some of them were King Super employees, some were just community members, some were customers or witnesses. Here's the kinds of things that they were looking for. This is all data from mental health partners that they pulled together. Services they requested to connect with a veteran, to see the trauma dogs, right? To find their property, to find general resources for housing, spiritual care, mental health counseling, victim services and compensation, and then support from Kroger. going a little bit further, just you can see kind of the ebb and flow of, we were pretty busy on Tuesday and Wednesdays and less so on the weekends. I know my time is running short, so I'm not going to get through all of these. But again, going on that theme of the foundation that I was fortunate to serve as an instant commander on in this community, these were all the things that happened. We had the store meeting at Coors Event Center. The whole multi-agency group of leaders were there to figure out how they could offer support. We did our first walkthrough with the victims. And I'm not saying this just because Katarina's boss is here, but I'm going to say something here. Katarina Booth, she just did a phenomenal job helping the victims and their families that day. Those that wanted to could go back into the store for the first time and reclaim that space. It was really powerful, and to see people's courage to do that was just extraordinary. And Katarina just did such a wonderful job presenting herself in all the work around compassion and what to think about with the legal process and how we were there for them and the role of the victim advocates. It was really extraordinary. And we did something too, I don't know if some of you may have been involved too, there's something called the First Responder Expo that I think was only the second time this has been done. But when you think about all the people that responded, not just from Boulder, but other agencies surrounding Boulder, they provided an expo at Coors Event Center for their families and the responding folks so that they could come to a place and they too could get access to resources. Just right too often they're forgotten about. Whether it was to learn about trauma, or there's a lot of raffles and games just for them to feel appreciated. There were people that were just playing basketball and just really had a wonderful 2-day event where they could all come together and connect with each other and have them be recognized for the work that they did. All the work that went around the construction or the moving of the resource center to the baseline. Another story I'll tell you is when we selected the site, or MHP did at Baseline, the new site, the site where it's at right now. I went in there and it was the community foundation. Ted was on the phone from Cincinnati where Kroger is. Nancy Lewis, Amy McCarthy from COVA, again, the district attorney's office is there. And they said, well, what do you guys need? What do you want this space to look like? How can we create a healing space for everyone? I mean, it was just unbelievable the amount of support, caring, and thoughtfulness that went into this work to provide whatever people needed to get through their journey of healing. And then we also did another, and I'm going to show you a picture in a second, another walkthrough when the store reopened and gave them a chance to, as the associates in particular, to get through and see the space and start to come back to it. This is one of those walkthroughs that we did when the store was under construction. This was probably 2 weeks before opening day. And just as we're going through, the comfort dogs are there, mental health folks are there, and just letting people kind of start to get comfortable again. This is what it looked like from up on top. I learned a lot about the grocery business too. It was really fascinating. Quite honestly, this is what it looked like when it was all ready. And what a transformation that was. And I apologize, this is blurry, but I had to share this with you just because this was the opening day. And I don't know if any of you were, I know some of you were there. The associates kind of stood it reminded me of high school graduation or getting ready for a football game. They all lined up. This CU marching band was in front. You had the whole community out here and plenty of dignitaries and people that are involved in, and they just rushed themselves back into the store because I wanted to go back to work. And it was just really a powerful experience. So, the couple last lessons that I've learned, there's so much I feel like I'm skipping over. I'm just gonna say, I got a phone call one night, and it was from some young ladies with Girl Scouts that unfortunately went to Fairview High School. Remember, I'm principal of Boulder High School, so I just had to say that. Great school. They said, hey, can we bring over a couple boxes of Girl Scout cookies? And I said, sure, yeah, why not? The lesson that I learned is I should have asked what they meant by that. They brought over like 24 cases of Girl Scouts cookies, and it was unbelievable. And they came in, and then they actually spent some time there. They were curious, well, what's this resource center about? Because they also lived in the neighborhood. And, Girl Scout cookies actually became this thing in the first few days of the Resource Center. Whenever you came, you got a box of Girl Scout cookies. But it was, those stories like that, really brought about a sense of connection. The other things that we really struggled with were Boulder Strong, the whole idea of Boulder Strong. We want to be strong, but at the same time, does the word strong prevent people, or at least maybe not clue them into the idea that they can get help because they have to take care of themselves? So had we to do it over again, we may not call it Boulder Strong. I don't know, but we had a lot of conversation around that. And this last thing that I'll say, because I know I'm over, is just a sense of private-public partnerships. I don't know communities that respond together like this. I mean, we can all see examples, unfortunately, across the country where maybe that hadn't happened, but Nancy Lewis really meant it. I mean, and she's been doing this work for decades. She had never seen a community come together, and people working with each other and supporting each other, and people that all seemed to know each other and be collegial with each other. So, DA's office, law enforcement, COCERN, MHP, COVA, King Soopers, Kroger, the Community Foundation was extraordinary. The 2 victim advocates from the FBI were wonderful. And they really provided a space for people to start to heal. And I just feel like I've missed so much, but I just wanted to at least give you a window into my mind of what this experience was like. And say thank you for all of you in this room, for building such an amazing community that is so resilient that it can make its way through this horrible experience. And I know from the associates and people that I met with, and myself included, they felt that support. And for people who felt like, I don't know what to do or how to get there, people felt like they felt supported. And they felt accepted, and they felt like they could go to a place to talk and figure out maybe how to, in some cases, even start over. So, wow. So thank you for listening. And if there's any questions?
Okay.
Yeah. Is it okay if I go down, Fred? Go down.
First of all, I want to thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
I'm choked up. My uncle, my family, and the King family grew up together in a little town in Nebraska called Meadow Grove.
Oh.
And my uncle, Ken, and Lloyd King in the 30s, everyone was pretty poor, and they hitchhiked to Denver. And in the late 30s, Lloyd said he wanted to start a grocery store.
Wow.
He wanted my uncle to go in with him. My uncle didn't want to, much to my sadness. I got to know Lloyd King, and I'll tell you, the way I knew him anyway, this would have totally broken his heart. He was a dear, loving human being, and I really appreciate your being here today. Our house was a block away from the store, and I haven't been in yet. We don't do very well with grieving in this country. And I think I learned some things, but some things I'm not ready to do yet.
Sure.
But I'm very grateful that you came today.
I'm honored to be here, and thank you for sharing that perspective. And your uncles would have been proud to just see the King Soopers team do whatever they could for every associate and be really creative, really creative.
Well, you've taken us a long step, a huge one, in understanding how to grieve. Our country needs every lesson in our society and culture that we can possibly get in a healthy way to understand that we all grieve, and we're going to grieve. We just need to learn how to do it where we can all stay healthy and part of caring and loving for each other.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks so much for speaking to our club. Very important topic. I know you don't have a lot of time to answer this question. It's a complicated question, but I want to turn attention briefly to the shooters in these events. And we often are blithely say, well, they must be mentally ill or they wouldn't be shooting people. But actually, they don't fit in any category of mental illness usually. And so I'm wondering what can be done, if anything, or what your thoughts are about the shooters of these tragedies.
I don't know if I could call on the district attorney impromptu to help with this a little bit, but what I would say is what we know from the research is folks with mental illness are more often than not going to be victims of crimes than the folks who are perpetrating crimes. We also know, I was listening to an interesting NPR interview after the Uvalde shooting about the profile of these folks who make these decisions. And sure, maybe there's some mental illness going on, but there's something there around shame, betrayal, and a sense of powerlessness. I apologize, this keeps ringing in my ear, this thing. I don't know if I can really answer that question because I don't feel like I'm the right person to do that, honestly, but what I just want to underscore the point, and this is what I think we all need to help our communities understand, is this is an issue not about mental illness. This is something very different. And I think that's the only message that I could deliver from my vantage point. So, and I'm sorry. Yeah. Did you want to share something? Yeah. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, maybe. So, a couple quick thoughts, and then I'll answer your question to the best of my ability. First, I'm often asked how people at the district attorney's office and in law enforcement respond to some of the worst acts we see in humanity. And what I often think and share, and I'll share with you today, is that in those moments, we're also seeing the very best of humanity in response. And that's something I always look to. So if you think about each one of us and the acts that we take on any given day, we're like a stone being thrown in the water and we have a ripple effect on the world around us. And there are those, including the King Super Shooter, who have a terrible, explosive-like impact when their stone hits the water. But there are people like you who have such a positive impact every day. And I really appreciate you being here and talking about what you've done to help the community and help individuals recover. And I think that's particularly important for us to remember today. The data from the FBI shows that actually a very small percentage of mass shooters are suffering from significant mental health disorders. That almost seems wrong, right? Because you see someone do something like this, or any mass shooting, you think that person must be crazy, and that's a layperson's way of viewing it. But in fact, the data is pretty clear. It's a very small percentage. Now, the King Super Shooter is currently at the state hospital, as you know, but they're making progress and he is improving over time. So I'm very optimistic, if not confident, that he'll be back and be held to justice, and that is my firm commitment to the victims and to this community. I promise you that. The other thing I want to just highlight to build off what you said is that we have an incredibly resilient and strong community, and you see it in the response here. But don't lose sight of the fact that the foundation for that response was already laid before that day. All the groups that we've talked about here today were already working together before that day of the incident. So both on the law enforcement DA side, FBI, all the agencies, when we gathered in the Boulder Police Department that first night, and I looked out in a room just like this, and there were about 130 law enforcement officers. Many of us had worked together over the years and had strong working relationships that are really important at a time of crisis. Same with all the other people who came together here, including our great speaker. So I think those relationships and who we are as a community is put to a test at moments like this. But Nancy Lewis, who's in charge of COVA and has responded to mass tragedies throughout Colorado, and I've had the honor of working with her at the Aurora movie theater shooting and other mass tragedies, she was right in saying no county has ever responded as strongly and as well as Boulder County. It doesn't mean we feel good about what we've lived through and what we continue to struggle through, but I think it's important for us to remember because it's the people in this room and who we are as a community that allows us to respond the way we do. So hope that answers your question, but can you just join me in giving our guest speaker a round of applause as long as I'm up here?
And yes, Kevin, we in Rotary get the last word. And but the word we want to give you today is thank you so much for sharing this with us and for standing up the Boulder Strong Resource Center that has meant so much to this community. And as you know, Rotary International has taken on the job of eliminating the polio from this planet. And in spite of the recent reports from New York about wastewater polio, we're really this close. And in your honor for speaking with us today, we want to donate 100 doses of vaccine to the Polio Plus campaign. Thanks again.